Anytime you're ready. Good morning, Ryan. How are you?
Good morning, Steve. How are you?
You look like you're out in the West. You're not sitting here next to me.
I am. It's been, snow last week and a little bit of a sick baby this week.
Oh.
Is yeah.
Well,
That
when she gets older, maybe we'll see her scurrying about behind you, and you can
That's
join the.
right. Yeah, and I can either do the terrible like arm thing or did you see the parody video?
I haven't seen the parodies. Oh.
Oh, you should check it out. It's like not just a parody; it's a commentary. It's basically what would a woman have done in that situation, and she just handles it. Like she feeds the baby while continuing to eloquently
I'll have to.
discuss. It's
If you
great.
don't know what we're talking about, I think we referenced it the last podcast.
Yep.
It's the video that is for parents of small children. Just as everything, it's when the little kid walks into the middle of a live BBC interview from.
Right.
I think a Brit professor who's being interviewed from Korea, and his wife comes in, and the kids jump in, and wife comes in. Oh, you got to find it online.
It's really
So,
great. Yeah.
anyway, so we're talking about computing today, and the computing
Yes. Yeah.
module. We're in our penultimate module.
There you go. Love
And
that. One of my favorite words.
yeah, and so after you think about Web 1.0 or Web 2.0 in this, then you move on to the 21st century and what happens beyond. But today we're going to focus on the proposals in the computing module, and we have read through them all,
Yes.
and we have actually commented on them individually. We've hit a new level of professorship, I think, but getting that
That's right.
done today. Which I hope it helps. And I haven't gotten a chance to read Ryan's comments, and he probably hasn't read mine, but my guess is they're similar. And what I did in my comments was say, that's a little broad. Can you narrow it? And you say you want to do uses and grats, but it looks to me like it's affordance, so think about doing affordance theory. And if I didn't see one, I said, well, I gave a suggestion. You don't have to follow our suggestions, but the suggestions, at least I think that the suggestions basically said, pick something and focus on it. And
Right.
so what I thought
Exactly.
we'd do is just walk through each of these topics here and talk a little bit about them. Some of them are great, all of them are interesting, but and we've got everybody's listed here. And so what you should be seeing on your screen at some point is actually also in the course syllabus. So under new in 507, when you click to the home button, there'll be a new in 507, and it will take you right there to comments on computing proposals. So the U and G, the uses and grats topics, there were 7 of them that we counted, and just talk about each one of them for a brief. And some people have last names, some people don't. I apologize. But Marco's concept on Twittergram could easily be perceived and conceived as a uses and grats, right? Because Marco is out there and he's responding. He's an entrepreneur, and he's going to create a prototype, and he's responding to user needs, right? To their lack of satisfaction. What do they need? They need to be able to tweet. They need to be able to tweet with the ease of Instagram, and they need to be able to share photos with the ease of Twitter and the reach. And so, okay,
Yeah.
that's responsive to user needs.
Right. Versus Twitter deciding what they think we would want.
Right.
And
So,
developing something to serve that need. Yeah. Exactly.
and Savilios, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. Someday we'll talk on Zoom or something, and I'll learn,
Yeah.
as I did with the next person, which I'll reveal when we
Yeah, I was
get there.
impressed. You'll be impressed too.
Yeah.
Folks.
When I read that proposal, it was a little unclear to me what exactly he wanted to do. I think it's he, and it's. But I suggested that one of the things he could do was take an example like hashtags, which is a classic uses and grats story. Somebody along the line invented the hashtag, but they didn't work for Twitter. It was a user who said, hey, I can connect my tweets to somebody else's tweets. And eventually Twitter responds and says, oh, we're going to support that by searching and stuff. But it was user driven. Users had a need to connect their tweets with each other, and they figured out a way to do it. Uses and grats all the way.
Yep.
The Saradakis, catch the name, Saradakis.
There you
And he's, of course, close to my heart because he's working in Tiddlywiki, which is what you're viewing here. And he proposed to create a timeline. And so a suggestion that I might have there would be why don't you focus your timeline on how the computer showed up in people's houses? I don't know. you could imagine the picture of the big massive box in the living room into the
Yeah, like when did it move from this space to this space, and then when would you likely to see, it show up in these, like, that's your timeline, right?
right.
not the invention, the space, the time is the spaces. Yeah.
Right, and or in businesses. I remember
Right.
I remember working in the mid '80s, and it was actually I had a real job before I became a professor. But working in the mid '80s in an office, and when the computer showed up, the uses and grats approach was, well, you put it in the accountant's office, because who else needs a computer? We were consultants. I mean, we need, and then it very quickly moved to other people's offices. But the social structure was that I was the junior analyst, so I didn't get a computer. So I had to go to the senior analyst's office to work on the computer, kind of thing. And so that's an interesting way of how social structure responds, how directs people's uses of computers. And sometimes they put a computer in an executive's office where it would sit there while the workers were saying, God, I wish I had a computer. And that's, again, uses and grats. So, yeah, and then the Brianna, she asks why people blogged.
Right. Classic using, yeah, exactly.
They didn't blog because they could. They didn't blog because, hey, somebody invented the blog. The users invented the blog, and the software companies responded. I kind of remember building early websites, and I didn't know I was building a blog, but it's like, oh, that's a blog now. And they responded, because we would add a post every day and go through all these hoops, and eventually the service came to serve our needs. But we had the need, we responded. Okay. And I think Mark's project, I'm talking all the time, you're not saying anything. These are all ones that I reviewed, I know, so yeah. It must be. Yeah. Mark's project was, I was going to suggest that he might reframe that. I think Mark had 3 big topics in his proposal. It's like, pick one.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Narrow. You're going to thank us later to narrow.
Yeah, pick one. And I thought the most interesting one in Mark's proposal was, he kind of talks about that people have this innate desire to connect.
Yeah.
And so then they had the need, and how did they use the network to satisfy the need?
Right, exactly. Yeah, versus the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you read the next 2.
Yep. Yeah, Ezra so it looked at the way in which Web 1.0 was perhaps a little bit, obviously was less user centric in terms of its concerns, and looked at the way, and that's sort of back to the focus thing, is the proposal talked about both Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, and as we talked about, the transition to 2.0 as a response to user needs and desires. And I think that's really interesting. I think that you front load that in the product, is make that transition the focus for, versus trying to maybe do too much with the Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, because it nicely focuses in on the uses and grats part of.
Yeah, so rather than do Web 1 or Web 2 or do both, just do that little spot between them. That's very cool. Okay, great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Justin similarly was looking at the transition from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, talking about Napster and MP3, so I thought that was really interesting. He talks a lot about both theories, affordances and uses and grats, but it's interesting and you could take it either direction, but I would almost maybe say take it in one or the other. Is it that Napster created this large file system and then the shareability, which is what then users responded to, or was it that users, which I think maybe might be what you're looking at, is that Napster satisfies the needs to have to share music and entertainment, things like that. So just pick which. I would say pick one versus the other.
My memory was Napster the sort of the first music sharing system that didn't have a central repository?
I think so. Yeah, it was the peer-to-peer.
It was peer-to-peer. That's the word I was looking for. So that's.
And then of course it creates all these clones. You take one down and then I forgot. It's funny because all of the LimeWire.
I remember LimeWire. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of them.
Yeah, but so this concept of peer-to-peer networking was out there, sitting there. Users had, God, I want to share music. I'm going to grab this technology. They didn't invent peer-to-peer for music sharing and to avoid copyright. But users
Right.
took, yeah, Napster. That was really an interesting period of time, the Napster years, and they eventually got blown out of the water. They lost their major court case and essentially were bankrupted, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
Metallica sued them basically, and then they got bought out, and so they still exist. Like you could, I think they basically became a Pandora
Yeah,
kind of streaming
yeah,
service. They wanted to rebrand
but the
themselves.
key
Yeah.
was that peer-to-peer aspect, and
Yep.
I think the you could go either way. I see what you mean, but to me the more interesting thing is really users' power, and I
Yeah.
think so. If you had a chance, Justin, to maybe focus it on that, so. Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of students who did affordances, and we broke those into 3 groups. Um,
Yep.
and so the first group talks about technologies, um, and I think I read Kevin's, and Kevin, although he doesn't mention affordance theory, um, which he hopefully will, and I don't remember the proposal, but you've got to do it, Kevin. You can do it.
Yeah.
But he says, look, people move from telephone to email. Why? Because it was easier, but affordance, 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 affordance. Perfect
Right,
project,
exactly.
very tightly focused, but don't just say this is why they did it. Say they did it because those are the affordances of email. You need that
Yeah.
word affordance in there. And I think you read Corinna's.
Yep, Karina. She was looking at barcodes, and it's an interesting proposal to say that as like a presentation to businesses for them to adopt it. So it's essentially presenting the affordances of barcodes to businesses to show that they should adopt it, and then ergo looking at the history of the barcodes adoption.
Okay,
in sort of an
yeah.
innovative way.
So skipping over Christopher, we'll come back to him after we talk about Bill and Daniel because they have similar design projects with different technologies.
Yes, exactly.
And Bill, and we can talk about both Bill and Daniel here. They both were talking about doing the transistor, and to me, the transistor, maybe we messed it up and put the article about the transistor in the computing module when it really belonged in the electronics module, because it's electronics, it's not computing.
Yeah, I would have to go back.
We'll
and
look
and
at
see.
it, but I'd encourage both Bill and Daniel to not do transistors. I hope you're not too into it, but to pick something, same strategy, just pick a more computing kind of technology. And Bill's concept was really cool. He was creating an invite to an event, and hopefully he embeds the theory into that invite. And he was going to invite them, sort of like the like going to the Engelbart lecture. It was an invitation to that, but he was going to. Here's the unveiling of the transistor. I'd suggest, Bill, you might focus in on, like, invite them to some mythical demo that Tim Berners-Lee is going to do about the web.
Yeah, I just, and as a note, I did look. We do have it as a technological precursor to the computer era. So it is the very first reading from this. So we just were looking at it as like a run up to the computing era.
Okay. So it probably because we had too much loaded in the previous module, but we'll fix that for next semester.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, but try not to. I mean, the transistor, it is really interesting, but what it does is it takes away your opportunity to focus on the computing era for a project.
Right.
So, and then what was Christopher's?
Oh, this was looking through it was the first laptop.
Oh, the
I
Osborne
believe,
one, right?
Yeah. So the affordances of what. Well, actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, going back, is that Christopher was saying he was going to talk about it just in grads, but it seemed like maybe it was a little bit more affordances. You're discussing like, the businesses and people could take these computers out, and that does satisfy a need. But when you say that, I think you're talking about portability.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the users sort of drove the need for the laptop. It's the laptop sort of shows up, or at least you could take it either way. But it seems like you're talking about affordances to me.
Shortly after when I was working in that business in the mid '80s, that senior analyst who had the computer I was allowed to use in his office, it happened to be one of those compacts. I don't know if you remember the original compact portable. It was a portable computer. It was 27 pounds, and it came with a case and a strap.
Yeah,
and you could sort of get it into an overhead bin, but boy, was that thing heavy. I mean, they were just talk about road warriors. At least they've gotten light now, but 20. I remember
Yeah.
flying on an airplane with that thing, 27-pound computer. Holy cow! Yeah. So
Yeah.
and so the Osborne was about the same size, if I remember. They were just like
Yeah.
mammoth kinds of things. So
Right.
a second set of affordance topics deals with everyday lives,
Yeah.
but not like how did people how did people's needs for family connection and privacy and the business
Yeah,
needs,
that's different. Yeah.
that's drove where the computer went. This asks, well, how did their lives change when computing comes in?
Yeah.
Jared, Jared says education, business, and home. He's going to do it all. Pick one, and I italicized home there to mean people's non-professional life, generally called home. I mean, home life happens out in the bars, etc. But yeah, I would focus on that. Pick one, but it's really how do people everyday life is a great topic.
Yeah.
Samantha, I think you read that, but I wrote the phrase "machine in the garden."
Oh yeah. I was just say I didn't recognize that from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Um,
that's a throwback phrase to a Leo Marx book that I read a long time ago about the machine in the garden, talking about the trains moving through the countryside in the 19th century, and how it was a Thoreau kind of thing, the Thoreau
Yeah.
garden, and how that's an affordance or malaffordance, you know. And so I think you could do the same thing again. The machine in the garden, the machine in the home. How does that, you know, is it the constant blue light that you know, whatever it is, and she was kind of getting at some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah,
read
definitely.
Kathy Spitzhoff's, I think.
Yeah, yeah. What you see is what you get. Looking at sort of inspired by the pamphlet, looking at web design and the affordances of being able to, as a designer, see exactly what you're doing, you know, in real or at least semi-real time, and how that facilitates better design and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, interesting. Just while we're going to do a what you see is what you get, sort of a tiddlywinky when you edit is on a kind of what you see is what you get. So the left is the editing and the right is the presentation.
Right.
Word and Google Docs integrate those, and so it's an interesting challenge. And so I think that the what you see is what you get it's like you make the change and it shows immediately. And
Right.
how that changed. That's very, yeah, that was a really important moment. Not sure why I put it in everyday life. It should have been down in systems, so we'll change it.
Maybe it was just a visual thing.
Maybe, yeah. So there are three systems, what we classified as systems proposals. Amy, and I forgot her last name, begins with a P. She has a really interesting proposal, which I don't quite understand, but I think I get it. It's a really challenging topic. She wants to talk about
good.
software engineers, software designers, and the affordance of the software design process.
Mm-hmm.
And so it stimulated me to do a quick little Google search, and there's a literature on it. So you'd want to tap, and I even gave her the link. You want to tap into that literature that. It's beyond. I mean, I didn't read it for detail, but it's like there are certain affordances of the software design process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that sounds great. Really interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jennifer looked at the Apple ecosystem, or at least thinking through how the iPad is sort of a culmination of the ability, the affordances of being able, of the camera, of all of these. There's I should have mentioned it in the comments. There's a great old ad where it has this guy. He's got all of these electronics. He's got a camera on his shoulder. He's got all of these Walkman, these big things, and like it's equated to the fact that all of this stuff now fits in your pocket. And so I think that's sort of where Jennifer's going is how all of these technologies can, the affordances of merging them together.
So so it's a convergence. So
I
the
think so,
convergence. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And Brendan Mack.
You're out of the Apple ecosystem now, huh?
I did. This is a Droid phone which I carry around now, and I'm not only out of the Apple ecosystem, but I've decided to go low cost devices to see what it's like.
Yeah.
Two reasons. I didn't feel like spending $500 to replace a broken phone, and I'm starting to get like carpal tunnel in my thumbs from scrolling so much.
Oh,
And so
okay.
I could go for medical solutions, but I thought if my phone is really awful, I won't use it as much.
That's right. Yeah, there you go.
And since I obviously can't control myself, so I'm fully
right. No,
addicted.
that's out of the question.
So I can't stop. So maybe if it's no fun, I'll just, so I'm gonna, it's a denial strategy. So we'll see if my hands feel bad. I should be using my computer to read. And it's really, it's all from scrolling on the phone, which is just like, somebody suggested that there's some apps that you tap for next page. Like if you read in, Kindle, I think, is a tap. There's
Yes.
you don't scroll on a Kindle, you tap.
Yep.
But I'm not going to do it. Then I just have like a different part of my thumb hurt. The tapping part
Different
would
muscle,
now hurt.
but it still hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so my undergrads that I talked to yesterday were kind of excited because many of them are actually in the Droid. And,
yes.
And in the TiddlyWiki class, or the Designing and Writing Interactive Text class, which I constantly talk about the value of using a box of Lego pieces instead of getting a pre-designed set of Lego with instructions. And he said the Droid is like that. The iPhone is, you can build it, follow the instructions, do as we say, and the Droid is, you have to bring more of yourself to it. So we'll see. I don't know. There were a couple of projects. I read Alexander Castro's, and I couldn't pull a theory out of that, to be honest. I just couldn't figure out where he's going with it.
Yeah. So, same with Dylan about programming languages, and there just wasn't. It could have been there was I think basically a readability discussion, but for the most part, it wasn't explicit on the efforts.
So, you got to make those explicit. And if you saw our podcast that we created when we introduced the module, we tried to hit the same messages. And the other thing is, as you move forward, is make sure that your project reflects the material covered in the course readings. It doesn't necessarily have to cite it, although that would be fine and helpful. But it certainly has to reflect it. You need to see some evidence that you're absorbing those ideas and applying them. So there we go. That's the end of the Computing Module Proposal podcast. I hope Lily feels better. And
thanks.
And I'll report next podcast on how my experience with the Droid is going.
Yeah. Ice down those thumbs.
Catch you later, Ryan.
Yep.
Bye now.